Are you wanting high-speed internet but don't have access to PUD fiber? Try Sky-Fi high-speed wireless internet from LocalTel. Call 888-8888 today.
Welcome back to Let's Learn here on the NCW Life Channel. I'm Eric Grandstrom, your host, and on this series we've been talking about death and dying and having a conversation, at least trying to start a conversation with you and your family and your loved ones about what you'd like when that time comes, because it's coming for us all, whether we like it or not. Joining us today here on Let's Learn, we have Allison Foreman, who's a local attorney here in the Wenatchee Valley, who helps people with estate planning. And Allison, first of all, thank you for taking the time to join us on Let's Learn.
Of course. I'm happy to be here.
Tell me about, first of all, you, a little bit about you and how you got into law and why you got into law and why this end of the law.
I chose law because, as my mom will tell you, I really like to argue. So that made it a natural fit. I also like to plan, and that's what led me toward transactional law, doing a lot of business planning, estate planning, tax advising, and when things go wrong, a little bit of estate litigation. I've been an attorney for about 10 years, practicing for about the last 7 here in Wenatchee.
Okay. What's the most, I guess, joyful moment that you see from your profession?
It's actually not from estate planning. The best moment in all of law is watching an uncontested adoption take place. You're in the courtroom, everyone's got a camera, there's smiles, tears, everybody's happy.
See, I think there's such a negative connotation that comes with attorneys for whatever reason, and I'm sure some of that is validated, but you don't think about the happy stuff that goes on where you need help in the law to make things happen.
Yep.
So let's talk about estate planning a little bit. So this course of this conversation here on Let's Learn, death and dying. It's not a conversation a lot of people want to have, but I'm hoping that through this series of episodes and all the things that we've talked about, at least starts a conversation. So what happens if I die and I don't have any plans? I don't have a will, I don't have anything ready to go. What's the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is that the laws of intestacy will apply to your estate. Washington has set out defaults in a statute that direct who gets what. If you're married and have kids, usually your spouse and your children will share whatever you have. If you don't have a spouse, but you do have kids, it'll usually go to your children. If you don't have a spouse or kids, next in line is parents. No parents, next in line is your siblings, and so forth. Eventually, some remote cousins might get something if there's a bomb and everybody in your immediate family died, but that would be pretty remote.
So is this something that has changed over the years?
It was built on common law, so it's pretty constant.
Okay.
One thing that people don't appreciate about it, though, is it doesn't take into account step families. So if you have a blended family, you might have some distributions that aren't what you would expect.
Which is really common occurrence these days. So more to the point about making a plan.
Yes.
Now, Allison, if I don't have an attorney and I have this piece of paper right here and I start saying, okay, this is what I want.
Right.
Does that count as a will?
A will in Washington to be legal needs 2 witnesses. It needs to be signed in the presence of 2 disinterested witnesses. It needs to state some basic things, testamentary intent, your name, who you're leaving things to, and again, needs to be signed in front of 2 witnesses. A notary is always a good idea as well.
Okay. But you don't have to have that, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay. What's the difference between a will and a living will, or is it the same?
They are different. It's a common misconception that a living will is a will substitute of some type. A will is the direction for how your property will be distributed at your death. A living will, also known as a health care directive, is what you want done in the last stages of your life from a medical perspective. So that will often say, I want artificial nutrition for this long, or I don't want any of that. I want to be let go naturally. I don't want any artificial nutrition, breathing apparatus, etc.
Also, the do not resuscitate comes into play there, right?
Yes.
Now, I had heard that, again, this is about communicating with your family about what you want and what you don't want. I heard that even if you have a living will where you have a directive, do not resuscitate, and ambulance is called, whatever the situation may be, and you have a family member that is there that says, do whatever you can, that basically that living will at that point kind of goes out the window.
I think in those emergent type situations, what the first responders are thinking is, oh my gosh, I don't want to be sued for doing what the directive said when there's a family member who's contradicting it. If you have your directive easily available, perhaps magnet on the fridge, you can show those do not resuscitate orders to a first responder as the person who is in the situation with the first responders, and usually, but not always, they'll be respectful of those wishes.
Mm-hmm. You find that situation in a hospital setting too, where somebody comes on scene and, well, Uncle Bob said this. Well, no, Uncle Bob said that. And then there's this argument about, okay, what did Uncle Bob say? Meanwhile, Uncle Bob's laying there in a hospital bed and can't speak for himself.
That's why it's important for Uncle Bob to have a healthcare directive signed in a safe place and make sure the person who is the healthcare power of attorney or the healthcare agent has a copy.
Okay. Now you mentioned power of attorney.
Yes.
There's terms that I don't know anything about, and I told Allison before I started, I'm done with this, so I'm going to ask you questions that might seem a little simplistic, but power of attorney versus an executor, is that the same thing or is that different?
They're different. An executor is the person who you've assigned to take charge of your estate when you have died and distribute your assets. We don't actually even call them executors in Washington anymore. They're called personal representatives. Your personal representative takes care of your estate. A power of attorney is a separate document, separate from your will, that names a person, usually called an agent, sometimes colloquially known as a power of attorney, who will make decisions about your health care or your finances or both if you become incapacitated.
Okay. This opens up a whole nother route of conversation that we need to have. We're going to take a quick break and we'll talk about power of attorney and about who you decide to have as your power of attorney and whether that's a person or a document. It's kind of both. We'll do more as we continue here on Let's Learn on the NCW Life channel. We'll be right back.
Please join us weekly for the 12th District with yours truly, Kerry Condata. Check your channel guide for times or go to ncwlife.com for details.
Welcome back to Let's Learn here on the NCW Life channel, where we're talking about estate planning, all part of our Death and Dying, a Conversation series here on the NCW Life channel. I'm Eric Granstrom, joined by Allison Foreman, who's a local estate planning attorney. Allison, we left off talking about the power of attorney. Choosing that person, kind of walk me through that. What's a wise thing for people to do? Because I think, is it typical that you choose one of your offspring, son, daughter, whatever the case may be, and say, okay, I need to make you the power of attorney?
It's typical to choose a child. The main reason for that is because you need to choose someone who's trusted and someone who's a little bit younger than you. If you named your best friend, for example, there's a likelihood that he or she might lose capacity before you or at the same time as you. So having someone who's a few decades younger is generally a good idea. Your child typically is someone who knows you well, who's familiar with your wishes, who you know isn't going to take advantage of you. So it's important to name someone younger. It's also important to name someone trustworthy and also someone who lives relatively nearby. If there's an emergency and they're going to need to act as a power of attorney, especially for healthcare purposes, it helps to have someone who's physically near you, who can go to the hospital, go to the bank, help you make those choices.
How do you, and I don't know if this is an easy part of this conversation, but approach mom or dad and say, okay, who is this person? We're getting to be that time of your life where nobody knows tomorrow. Nobody's guaranteed of tomorrow. So how do you approach that conversation? Because I think that there's that trepidation about signing off on something like that because, okay, well, they have all the power, I have none now.
Well, you could always broach the topic by pointing out a power of attorney can be as broad or as narrow as they want it to be. It can also be a springing power of attorney, which springs into effect if they are incapacitated, say as determined by two doctors. So that might give them reassurance that you're not just trying to get the keys to the castle and clean out mom and dad's bank account before they notice what's happening.
Speaking of bank accounts, when you're making these plans, and this really hits close to home because my mom has dementia, my dad is her power of attorney, my sister is both of their power of attorney. She's moved to Oregon. I'm geographically closer. Thankfully, having this series on the TV helped me get into that conversation with my dad as far as those types of plans. And I think it's important to point out that just because you did a will, just because you did a living will, just because you signed a power of attorney, these are living and breathing documents. They're not just done, that's it. They don't change, right?
That's a great point. Circumstances change, people change. Sometimes an agent or an executor you might have appointed passes away. So these documents need to be revisited every few years, or anytime you have a major life event like a marriage, a birth, a death. That's a time to go into your attorney, ask if you need to revise your documents, and make sure that you have relevant and current appointments in place.
Sure. And that's also, and it's a delicate situation because you go to your parents and say, okay, I need to know your bank accounts and where they are. And not just for me, I have 2 siblings. We all should know in case something happens, Lord forbid, that Dad, you can't take care of Mom anymore, but we need to take care of the both of you. As far as that planning is concerned and kind of going through this process, how do you as an attorney help people? Because I mean, you can be as simple as a bar napkin and make sure you got a couple of people that sign it, or you can get really in depth and take up a lot of your time, which means dollar signs, to do this. So how do you approach people and say, okay, here's some good thumbnails to work with on where we should look at things?
Well, the first thing I do is listen. Every family is different. Every couple has a different set of children, a different preference for charitable giving, perhaps, different ideas of what the end of their life will look like. So the first meeting when I meet with people, almost all that I do is listen. And then I walk them through the framework. Generally, I would recommend having at least 3 estate planning documents in place. Your will is your backbone of your estate plan. That's your directive as to how your property is going to be distributed. If you have minor children, it also typically names a guardian for those minor children, which can be a problem if there's no clear candidate and you haven't talked to anyone about it. If both you and your spouse were to die, what happens to your kids? It's a big question. The second document would be the power of attorney, and that's an insurance policy in case one or both of you loses capacity. Again, someone can take control of financial and healthcare decisions if you're not able to make them. If you don't have a power of attorney in place, the only alternative is guardianship, and that's thousands of dollars to establish, and it takes at least 60 days. So if you have an emergency and need someone to sign on your behalf, it's going to be tough. The third document is what we talked about earlier, the living will or the healthcare directive, and that makes sure that whoever is your power of attorney for healthcare decisions knows what your wishes are and can look at a document and say, Mom didn't want to be on a ventilator, or Dad did want artificial nutrition for 60 days, and then if he's still in a coma, that's it. So those kind of, I talk through those decisions with my clients. They're not easy conversations to have because, as you said, nobody likes to think about needing to have these documents in place. But just starting the conversation, really listening to clients and finding out where their true preferences lie is where I can add value.
Part of this conversation too about death and dying, it seems that generationally it's different about who you speak with. My parents are in their 70s.
Yes.
That's a whole different generation, especially when they were baby boom, World War II, their parents, you did not even talk about the word death. That was not part of the lexicon at all.
Right.
So that negative connotation kind of carried over to their generation, where I imagine my parents in this conversation, they get kind of a little nervous and Dad wants to go walk, over to the kitchen and get a beer rather than have this conversation, that they would rather talk to you than talk to their own children.
I think having the professional veneer can help. It makes it seem, again, more professional, seem more planning, like talking to a financial advisor, which I think most people are comfortable doing, talking to a legal advisor. It also makes you appreciate that you're talking to a disinterested person. I don't stand to inherit any of the estates that I plan, whereas talking to your child about this, maybe you start doubting, why are they asking so many questions about my money? Why are they asking who's inheriting what? So having a neutral advisor in there can really diffuse any tension that might exist in that situation.
I think too that there's the one part about an estate of whatever's left. What if there's money, if there's life insurance, if there was some sort of benefits, if there's a house, if there's things. But there's also the debt of those parents, of that person that, okay, maybe you were dealing with an illness for a long period of time. Just because you pass away doesn't mean that those debts are just going to disappear.
No, and they can be substantial and at times eat up most of the assets in an estate. So you might think mom and dad have lots and lots of money in the stock market, but if they had a very catastrophic final illness, or if, say, they had done some Medicaid planning and had some state aid for the last few years of their life that maybe was going to be recovered against once they passed away, poof, there goes most of the estate. So it's important to be forthright with your heirs about what debts might need to be paid as well, so they can plan for it, maybe with life insurance.
Now, if you're in a situation, hopefully, where you do have a sizable estate, where you have done well in your life and maybe in your parents' life that carried on to you, and you want to make some plans beyond your own family, there's that option too. We're going to talk more with Allison about that as we continue here with estate planning and trying to make those plans for once you're no longer here. It's all part of our Death and Dying, a conversation series here on Let's Learn on the NCW Life channel. We'll be right back.
Have a fun video you'd like to see featured on NCW Life? Email us at newsphotos@ncwlife.com.
Welcome back to Let's Learn here on the NCW Life channel. I'm Eric Granstrom, your host, joined today by Allison Foreman, a local estate planning attorney here in the Wenatchee Valley, who is helping us plan for the future, for that future when we're no longer around. All right, Allison, we kind of teased it a little bit. If somebody does have a large estate that they've got a ton of money that they did well in their life, and you know, some's going to go to the kids, but there's also tax ramifications, things like that. There's things that they can do to help the broader community too, right?
Yes, if you're concerned about state taxation or estate taxation at the federal or state level, you can always leave part of your estate to charity. There's a full charitable deduction for estates, so if you'd like to leave enough of your estate to charity that your estate then falls below the threshold for state or federal estate taxation, you can certainly do that.
And there's some great organizations here in this region, the Community Foundation of North Central Washington, Glenn Douglas Land Trust, to name just a couple, that have some great programs that you can either start one from scratch, call it the Eric Granstrom Foundation, or, you know, give into something that's already established.
And before you go and found the Eric Granstrom Foundation, it's important to know that few people need to be thinking about that threshold. In Washington State, the threshold is around $2 million for an individual or $4 million for a couple. Federally, it's north of $11 million for a couple now. So very few people need to think about federal estate taxation these days. Some people do need to think about state estate taxation if they have a nice home, maybe a vacation rental, and have done well in the stock market. Another thing to keep in mind is that Washington State doesn't have a gift tax. Federally, there is a gift tax. So if you want to give away money to reduce your estate, not just to charity, but say to your children and give it during life, you can do that to reduce your estate as well if you are somewhere between that $4 million and $11 million mark.
Okay, wow.
Those lucky few.
Yeah, I was going to say, it'd be nice to be there. I've been in situations where, you know, grandma's 90-some years old, you know, grandpa's long gone. She actually had the grandkids come over to the house, and she gave them the little sticky colored little sticky things. She says, okay, go around and just put a sticker on what you want. And I thought, well, that's kind of morbid, kind of a morbid garage sale almost, but okay. There you go, then you know.
It can work, and part of all the wills that I do at the very end, we have a list. It's authorized by statute. One of the RCWs allows people to write a handwritten list of an item and a name. They sign it and they append it to their will, and that will indicate how specific items of personal property are passed.
And I think it's important to point out in this process of planning and having this conversation about what you want, it's not about what they get. That's not, and there might be kind of the sense at first is, oh, well, you just want my stuff. No, I think the goal here is for people to tell their families and let them know, I wanted you to have this.
Yeah, it can be a nice legacy. And sometimes you might be surprised you didn't know that grandma meant for you to have some special family heirloom, and it can be really meaningful.
We talked a little bit about, and we have just a little bit of time left, and I want to get your contact information for those who have more questions about this, and hopefully we've started a little conversation with the families about this is not a comfortable conversation. You might be a better person to talk to than necessarily interested family members on planning and what there might be out there. Also, there are those little things that if you had done something way in your past, like for example, maybe you donated to a sperm bank way back in the day, long before you got into your current situation, and maybe you even forgot about it. That's going to come back around.
Sure, what do you do? Well, in most wills, you include the language, I specifically disinherit or make no provision for all family members, children who are not named in this will, whether known or unknown to me. So including that phrase, it's a boilerplate phrase, can take care of the sperm bank contingency for you.
Is that, I guess, is that a more modern issue, a more modern problem?
It hasn't come up with many of my older clients yet, but
yeah,
maybe in the next few decades.
If people have questions and they want to get a hold of you, how do they do so?
You can visit our website at fahclaw.com or call us at 662-9602. You can also reach me by email at allison@fahclaw.com.
Okay, and that's Foreman?
Apple, Hotchkiss, and Zimmerman.
Okay, all right. Wanted to make sure and get all the partners involved in that.
Yes.
What's your hope for the future? You're Wenatchee, is this home? Is this where you want to be? Because you're not originally from here, right?
No, I'm from Tacoma. But my husband's from Wenatchee, and his family have been here for a long, long time, and we plan on staying around.
Okay.
I hope to keep growing my practice and serving the people of North
And meantime,
Central
you're a
Washington.
busy mom, too.
Yes, I have 4 kids. That's my night job, I guess.
Okay, so, Dr. Heal Thyself, do you have your own living will? Do you have your own will ready to go since you have your children and things like that?
I do, but it doesn't include my youngest daughter.
Oh, see, you need to update those things.
I haven't updated it.
And that's a very important fact. Mm-hmm. Okay, what you decided 20 years ago, we kind of alluded to this earlier, that this needs to be a living document. This needs to be a breathing document. It needs to be updated because if you did something 20 years ago, that was when maybe you were doing the life insurance thing and the life insurance, adjuster says, hey, you might want to do a will because that's a good idea and the kids are just growing up. Well, now they're out of the house, now they're gone, life has changed. You need to update those things.
Right, and the most common thing I see are executors who have died being included in a will and no provision made for appointing a new one, or afterborn children. And most wills will include a phrase, if my spouse and I have any more children, they're included in this will. But if you forgot that and you left out, the baby daughter, oops, too bad. So it is important to update those frequently.
That was the final question I had. So I did a will, forgot about it, I die, that will still exists. If that's been notarized, if that's been signed off by 2 disinterested parties and things like that, that's the legal document that still exists as far as, well, I'm sorry, even though you didn't do it 20 years ago from now, I mean, that's what we're stuck with.
Yep, time doesn't make the document go stale. They're not going to revoke a will because it happens to be 50 years old. If it's the last one you made, it's the one that governs.
Wow, okay, that's good food for thought. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course.
I appreciate it. It's nice to meet you. Allison Foreman joining us here on Let's Learn on the NCW Life channel. Again, the hope for this whole series is that we have at least started the conversation. It's up to you to finish the conversation and to take it whatever path you may will. But death is coming for us all, whether we like it or not. So at least have the conversation and make your plans. Thanks for joining us.
Is your vehicle in need of a quick oil change or tune-up before hitting the road this summer? Stop by Quick Lube and Tune, the home of the good guys at 610 South Wenatchee Avenue.